This is a poem I wrote. This comes from my book called From 15 to 17. An Gott. Shall I translate every sentence, every line?
It's probably better to read it all in German and
Yep,
then maybe
good.
do a translation.
Good. An Gott, this is in German.
In
now.
fact, if I was a real filmmaker,
yeah.
I could have
you
subtitles.
Are. What?
I could have subtitles.
Yeah, well, listen, it's time to get to that. You can do them in Hindustani too. Als ich unsere Priester sah, mit dem weißen, milden Haupt, ach, wie sehr waren sie mir nah, und ich hab an sie geglaubt. Als ich sie dann reden hörte, fremde Worte, hehr und rein, mich ihr Sinn bald ganz betörte, und ich glaubte sie allein. Als ich dann von Gott vernahm, von der segnenden Gestalt, die von all den Sternen kam, fand ich Stütze, fand ich Halt. Als ich hörte, dass er lenke die Geschicke unserer Welt, dass er auch an alle denke, war er so, wie es mir gefällt. Älter ward ich immer mehr, und es stieg der Jahre Zahl, und ich sah umher, sah nur Unglück, sah nur Qual. Sah gar jämmerlich Gestalten, Menschen, deren Leben Schmerz, konnte Gott, mein Gott, hier walten? Noch es glaubte dies mein Herz. Doch es kommen, eilen Tage, Kämpfe werden, Tod und Sieg, und das Leben wird zur Plage. Ist es nun des Gottes Krieg? Arme seh ich, Sklavenseelen, ohne Essen, ohne Brot, die sich schinden, die sich quälen, die da sterben in der Not. Reiche seh ich, Herrscher seh ich, mit Brillanten und mit Geld, die da plaudern, die erzählen, und mein Glauben, der zerfällt. Ich hab überall geschaut, doch mein Herz, es ist so leer. Fest hatte ich auf Gott gebaut, nun glaube ich an ihn nicht mehr. That's it. And now I'm, I'm 82, and I have not changed my mind about this. If anything, it has been confirmed by events.
It's amazing that you even got it to rhyme. You really made a real poem. And how old were you?
It's Mrs. Vogel. Mrs. Vogel's coming.
What year? What year?
What year? I was around 15 or 16.
What year?
15 or 16 years old, Marcia.
1937. It's 1937, the book says, right?
Yeah, the book came out in 1937. So
it was a big seller, right?
21,
Huh?
37.
Was it a big what?
It was a big seller.
Oh yeah,
16.
of course. Yeah, sure.
You were 16.
16.
That's pretty good stuff, Amos. Did you write it for school?
No,
You wrote it privately.
for school.
You wouldn't write that.
They would expel me or something like that. I don't know what. We were trying very hard to get out of Austria, of course, because it was literally a question of life and death. But that wasn't very easy because most countries did not admit immigrants. Now, America did, but it had a very limited quota, a very limited number of people who could come in, depending on what country they were born in. My father was born in Poland. He was very lucky because he got a visa to the United States at a time where if he had waited a week, I mean, it sounds funny, but it isn't. He would have had to wait 83 years to get into the United States. So he had a brother who had emigrated to America many years before and had become a fairly well-to-do man. And this brother gave him a visa. So my father left Vienna before us. He was the only one to get that visa. And then my mother and I could only come out later based on a visa we got not from America, but from Cuba. And the problem there was that you had to pay $10,000 to get that visa, and it was a payment made, I think, to the Cuban foreign minister. It was a little shady. So anyway, we had to go to Cuba by boat, and the only boat we could get, we were allowed to get, was a German boat. So we actually had to go from Vienna to Hamburg. That means we had to travel through all of Hitler Germany. That was a very trying experience, particularly for my mother, who understood this thing better than I did. And she was alone. She was responsible not only for herself, but for me. And we traveled to Hamburg, and I remember being in a phone booth and making any number of calls to find a hotel that would keep us overnight, because the boat was leaving the next morning. And none of the hotels would take Jews. Then we found out there's one hotel in Hamburg that any Jew can go to. Wonderful. So we went there, and then the following day we went on a boat to Cuba. That was also an experience. You want me to go into that? Yes or no?
Yes, I think it's...
It was an experience. It was a German boat, regular boat, and ship, really. And, you know, in order to get the most money out of us, the Germans forced us to buy first-class tickets. So I remember the irony of the whole thing, you know, that we were served like kings by the German crew in a restaurant, etc. And then at the same time there was the Munich conference crisis, where Hitler was suddenly wanted to take over Czechoslovakia. And that was a very, nobody knew how he would, whether he would succeed or not, or whether there would be war the next week or not. And he made a very hateful speech, which of course was heard on board of the ship, and the crew applauded, you know, and was very happy. And we were thinking that, you know, there was so much hate in that speech that maybe we would be thrown into the sea the next day, you know, quite seriously. It's not a joke. So then when we arrived in Cuba, that was cute too. They said, what visa? You haven't got a visa. The visa that we had paid $10,000 for. That's how corrupt that regime was. My uncle in New York had to send another $10,000 to Cuba to allow us to come in. In the meantime, we were kept in a kind of a, you can call it camp, call it a concentration camp, whatever you want to. At the boat outside, you know, on board, I mean in Cuba already, for 2 days or 3 days, and we felt very uncomfortable about that. So then we got into Cuba, and then it took 6 months for us to get into the United States. Of course, you know, not only was this a very painful period for me, it was made more painful by my realization that if I didn't have a relative in America who had money, and if he hadn't been willing to pay twice $10,000, I would be in a position that so many other Jews in Austria were in, who couldn't come to America because the quota system was extremely limited. They had to wait 83 years, you know. And not only that, we had to pay for the trip through Germany, we had to pay for the boat to Cuba. So that made me very uneasy, I remember. But that's how we arrived in the land of golden opportunity.